Hello, PK families. Welcome to another installment of our Student and Family Services webinar series. Today, we are going to focus on improving executive function skills in students. And that means we're focusing on prioritizing, managing time, and focus. And these skills are important for studying, planning, and completing assignments, as well as achieving future goals. So we hope that you walk away from this presentation with knowledge and resources you need to help your student further these skills. And today we are joined by our amazing school psych team, and I'll let them introduce themselves when they open their part of the webinar. Also, if questions arise throughout the webinar, you can type those questions in the Q&A section of the webinar, or you can just type them in the chat box and we'll answer them as we go. And there'll also be time at the end of the webinar if you want to hear everything and then ask questions at the end. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to school psych.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jasmine Bollier, and I'm joined by Rebecca Colombo and Jessica Wheeler. And we're just going to give you a little bit of tips to help sharpen your tools and to help your student prioritize, focus, and manage time. So we're going to start out first just going over our agenda. So we're going to talk about what executive functioning exactly is, what it looks like in students, and then how to improve executive functioning with some tips and tricks. So looking at these skills, so planning and prioritizing, organizing materials and ideas, and staying focused and productive are all self-management skills, but they're also skills that develop throughout executive functioning. And specifically, executive functioning is a set of skills that we use every day to learn, work, and manage life. And it's important to remember that these skills are not, you're not born with these skills. They're learned and developed over time. And trouble with executive function can make it hard for your student to focus, follow directions, prioritize tasks, stay organized, and regulate their emotions. So we're going to take a quick look at this video just to get a little bit of a better idea on what executive function is.
Was there sound on the video? All right, let me redo that so we can get some sound.
Executive function is the brain's air traffic controller. It intercepts a tangle of inbound thoughts and impulses and steers them towards productive outcomes. Executive function helps students stay focused, plan ahead and set goals, regulate emotions, monitor their own learning, and think flexibly and creatively. But children aren't born with executive function skills. They develop over time. In fact, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain which houses executive functions, is still maturing well into our teens and 20s. So teaching executive function skills should start early, be reinforced regularly, and continue up through high school, at least. How do you do that? Don't just teach content. Look for ways to take a step back and give students the skills and the discipline to learn on their own. And remember that failure is part of the process. Academic preparation needs to be taught. Show students how to use calendars and to-do lists, for example, to manage their time and plan ahead. Encourage students to ask questions like, do I have a plan for succeeding at this? What was confusing or difficult about that task? How can I do better next time? The research shows that metacognitive strategies lead to better preparation, planning, and performance. And high stress levels can impair executive function. So consider activities like mindfulness or meditation to help students deal with stress. And don't skimp on recess. Spend the time. The research backs you up. Executive function is a more accurate predictor of success than test scores, IQ, or socioeconomic status.
All right, so that video is able to give us a brief overview of what executive function is. And now we're going to take some of those key aspects and dive a little bit deeper. So executive function is a management system of the brain, and it does develop from ages 2 through 30. So like the video said, it's important to teach these skills explicitly all the way into adulthood. And they are to learn, work, and manage life. And it's also important to, again, remember that these skills are not something that people are born with. They're something that need to be learned and taught. So executive function involves 3 separate parts. The first being working memory, which is someone's ability to temporarily hold information in their brains. So for example, when a child is sitting in class and they may have an idea, so they're raising their hand, the teacher hasn't called on them yet, their ability to hold their question in their brain is part of working memory. Some children have a hard time doing that. So when it comes for their time, they'll say, oh, I forgot, or something of that nature. So that's working memory. Then comes flexible thinking, which is the ability to think through problems and manage situations when unplanned problems arise. So an example of flexible thinking would be a child is typically used to having a specific schedule throughout the school day, but something may arise. They may have a substitute teacher for the day. And some students have a little bit of a struggle adapting to those situations. So that's the flexible thinking part of it, that students' ability to adapt when something unplanned arises. And then there's inhibitory control, which is our ability to control our behavior, urges, and impulses. And this comes in when there might be a student that wants to shout out in class, and their ability to hold back and know that they should raise their hand before they do so.
Okay, so now that we know what executive function is and how these skills fall under that umbrella, let's look at what these skills look like in younger and adolescent adults. So first we have planning and prioritization, which is the ability to generate steps in a plan in order to reach a goal, as well as the ability to shift focus away from unimportant things. So for younger children, this may look like being able to come up with optional solutions to a conflict with a peer. And for adolescents, it may look like developing a plan for getting a job. Next, sustained attention is the ability to continue focusing on something even when things in the environment are distracting, even when you're tired, and even when you're bored. So in younger children, they express this by showing their ability to complete a 5-minute chore with occasional supervision. So for instance, doing the dishes or laying out their clothes for the next day. For adolescents, this can look like their ability to stay focused and complete homework for extended periods of time with short breaks in between. And lastly, time management includes the ability to estimate how much time you have, how to best allocate it in order to achieve a goal, and how to meet deadlines. It also includes the understanding of the importance of time. So for younger children, this could mean completing a short job within a set time limit. So for instance, making their bed before breakfast in 5 minutes. An adolescent may show this skill by having the ability to establish a schedule for themselves in order to meet a deadline. For instance, if there's a big project due at the end of the semester, knowing when to start working on it and how long each piece of the project will take in order to turn it in on time is an example of successful time management. So how can these skills be developed? So here we're going to provide some general guidelines of tips to be successful in helping your student. So first, Teach these skills explicitly, as we said before. Don't assume that your child will develop these skills through passive observations. It can be really helpful to think of executive skills like reading skills. So you wouldn't expect a student to learn how to read just by watching an adult read. So you would teach them the letters, the sounds, the sight words, and the same goes for these executive skills. You may need to teach some of them in the same way. Next, start with external changes. So when developing these executive skills, it's really important to start with changes to the environment, changes to the task, or changes to the way that you interact with your child can be a really helpful place to start. So for instance, having your child complete their homework in an area where you can monitor their progress and provide them with cues to stay focused. Using these external changes and cues to the environment are really helpful when initially developing these skills, and the hope is that over time these changes become internalized. Next suggestion is to use incentives. So yes, rewards. So rewards can really be anything from verbal praise to a really intricate point system with tangible prizes. Oftentimes people may think of rewards as more so the latter option, but they can really be things like getting to pick dessert on Friday night, or getting to go to bed 30 minutes later, or just a specific praise based on their effort. It may be really helpful too in the beginning to develop these rewards options with your child in order to increase their buy-in and their willingness to perform these activities. And I know some people may not be inclined to give rewards, but it may be helpful to also think of the ways that rewards help us adults too. So things like salary are a reward for us coming into work. So it's really beneficial, and it really helps students and adults alike. Next, establishing a rationale for certain tasks can be really helpful. So when developing new skills, talking through their purpose and their benefits can be really beneficial. Many times students who are already averse to things like homework or studying may feel like planning or keeping an agenda are just extra work, delaying the task. So explaining how planning and agendas are beneficial and may even help lower the amount of time or effort needed to complete the task may be really incentivizing for them. And lastly, the Goldilocks of support. So it can be really difficult to find the right balance of support to ensure that your child succeeds, but does so independently or can do so independently in the future. So just know ahead of time it may involve some trial and error in order to find the just right amount of support. And in the end, the goal is that eventually, once your child has mastered the task, that those extra supports and those extra incentives can be gradually faded away.
All right, so Jessica went into some wonderful general strategies for improving executive functioning in children. And now I'm going to go into some tips and tricks that students can use to practice and build these skills. So say you get a really big project assigned or a really big assignment, and it seems really overwhelming. You can help build your time management skills by breaking down the task into smaller, manageable pieces that you complete over a wider time period instead of all at once. And then you can also create a timeline for yourself for completing each of those pieces before the due date. And then in school, you probably get a lot of different assignments and a lot of different tests you have to study for, and it's hard to keep track of all of that in your head. So it's helpful to use a schedule, a planner, or a calendar to keep track of all of those deadlines and also the timelines that you create for yourself for those larger projects. And you can do this with just your phone's calendar, or you can find an app that you really like to use. And I'll also give some examples of some of these apps. And then people in general tend to work better in a quieter environment. So it's important to limit distractions while you are working. I know we all like listening to music or going on our phones, playing video games and scrolling through social media, but those things can be really distracting when you do have to focus for an extended period of time. So it's best to limit those when you have to focus. And then We also like to think that we're really good at multitasking, but in reality, when you are doing a bunch of different tasks at the same time, you're not really giving your full attention to any of those tasks. So it's best to try not to do that when you have to focus. All right, and then when you have to remember something that's really important, it could be helpful to use memory supports such as mnemonic devices. And an example of this is never eat soggy waffles, which is helpful to remember the order of the cardinal directions of north, east, south, west. And then I'm sure you also get a lot of different information thrown at you throughout the day, and it's hard to remember all of it. So it's helpful to write down the important things that you do need to remember so they don't get lost in all the other information. And then you can also practice your planning skills by self-reflecting after an assignment or in class by asking yourself what worked well and what didn't work well. And then when you find those answers for yourself, you can continue doing those things that worked well, and then also brainstorm some new strategies to try in the future for things that didn't work well. And then you can practice some sustained attention skills by monitoring yourself while you work. And you can do this by setting a timer that goes off periodically. And when that timer goes off, you can check if you are paying attention and understanding what's going on. And if you are, great, you can track how long you've been paying attention. And if not, you can then put your focus back on what you're supposed to be doing. All right, so then here are some of the helpful free apps that we wanted to share with you all. I believe most of these are available on both Android and Apple phones. And so some apps help with time management and sustained attention skills. And some examples are Focus Keeper, Flora, and Study Bunny. And apps like this basically allow you to set timers for how long you want to work. You can set timers for breaks, and some even let you mute certain apps so that they don't send you notifications when you are supposed to be focusing. And then there are also apps that help with your organization skills. One example is the My Homework app, which basically functions as a calendar that you can enter important dates and deadlines. And then there are also apps that help remind you of important things that are going on. One example is Remember the Milk, which allows you to create to-do lists for yourself and will send you reminders for what you have to do. So this is the Focus Keeper app. This is what it would look like. And so on the left is just showing you what the timer would look like if you had your phone open. And the second picture is kind of hard to see because it's a little dark, but the example here is you set your focus length time for 25 minutes, and then you would get a short break for 5 minutes. So basically you would focus on your work for 25 minutes, and then a timer would go off. Then you get your break for 5 minutes. After that 5 minutes, you have to go back to work for 25 minutes. And then you can set it up for if you do a rotation of that successfully every few times, you can get a longer break. And then on the end, it just shows you what it would look like if you locked your phone. It still shows you the timer. This is what the My Homework app would look like. So you can see that it basically looks like a calendar. You can see how many things you have on a certain day with the dots. And then you can click on a day and get more detail. You can also see everything that you have going on, and it organizes it by date. And then you can even implement your schedule into this to keep track of your classes. And then it's also available on desktop, so you can use your Chromebook to do this if you don't want to use your phone. And this is what the Remember the Milk app looks like. It basically just lets you create a list of everything you have to do. And then you can choose whether you want to get reminded via text message, email, or just a notification on your phone. And you can share your list with other people and even sync all different devices. So as a parent, you can also help your child build and practice these skills. At home, you can facilitate your students prioritizing and planning, or also model your own prioritizing and planning. So basically you can show them what you do to prioritize and then kind of facilitate and guide them through their own prioritizing. And then after you model and guide them through that, you can encourage their self-reflection by asking kind of what worked and what didn't work. And then since we know that distractions are not helpful for focusing, you can help your child create or find a space within the home that limits distractions. It might even be fun to decorate it with them or just design that space that's specifically only for quiet study and work time. And then if your child decides to use a planner app or create a calendar, you can sit down with them for the first time and help them add some things. And then you can also help them establish some routines for completing their work. And then if you do decide to establish any kind of routine, it would be helpful to post a visual reminder of that routine. And you can decide what's best or where you think it should go, but it might be helpful to place it near their workstation so they can see it while they're working. And then you can also create checklists that your student can use to kind of check off and keep track of whether or not they're completing all of the steps they're supposed to be. Also, when learning a new skill, it's completely normal to have some problems or some struggles, and there's nothing wrong with struggling when learning a new skill. But when those problems do arise, it's important to focus on solutions to those problems. And by asking your student or child what they can do next time and what can be done differently to prevent this from happening again. So when those problems happen, we don't want to focus on what went wrong. We want to focus on problem solving. And then also when something does go right, so when your child is being successful in using their skills, you want to praise them for their effort and the successes they are having while planning and organizing. And then just in general, patience and empathy is going to be really important during this process. And flexibility is really key here. So if you're starting out using one strategy and you notice it's not working, it's okay to start trying new ones to find out what works best for your individual child. And then it's also just important to keep in mind that building skills takes time. So it's okay if something's not working and your student just needs some little bit more practice. That's okay and normal. And then we are still developing these skills into adulthood. So it's kind of expected that these skills might not be showing immediate results. Basically, patience and empathy and commitment to practice will be really beneficial to your child.
Here we have some resources we wanted to provide that we found really helpful when creating this presentation. So this slide includes helpful tips and activities for supporting the development of executive function skills in your children. So Center of the Developing Child at Harvard University has some really great activity guides, and it's really great how they break it up with different age ranges between adolescence through birth. So those are really great options to look at. The Davidson Institute and Child Mind Institute also provide some really helpful tips for how to improve those executive functioning skills in your students. The Smart But Scattered book has been really helpful for us. They do a really great job of really going more in depth into describing what executive function skills are, really elaborating on what issues with executive functions might happen in different developmental phases. They talk about how to identify those the executive function skills that we as adults may struggle with as well, and how to map that on to the development of our child's success. And they also provide really great resources at the end. If you were to try out some of those calendars or checklists, they have some really great templates that we can use for our students that I found very helpful. And then this Understood Executive Functioning Strategies for Your Child is just another online resource that has some really great ideas and tips. And then here we provided some helpful resources for furthering your understanding of executive function. Takes a much deeper dive than what we were able to discuss here today. So the Executive Function podcast by Sarah Casti is a really great option for those of you that prefer that podcast modality as opposed to maybe a book or an article. And they have some really great things in there that are student focused specifically. So if you wanted to listen to the podcast with your child, combined, that would be a really great option. They also have certain episodes that are specifically for parents. So that's a really great option. And then the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University has another resource for you that really has some great videos and additional articles furthering the explanation of executive function. Again, I listed the Smart but Scattered book here as well because I think it's just really great and has a lot of great resources in it. And Understood also has an article talking more about what executive function is and what it might look like in different children. And lastly here, the Hill Learning Center, they listed 10 more resources for you. Some of them are included on our slides here, but I wanted to include their link as well because they link out to some really great options as well. So that is our presentation for today, and we wanted to leave time for questions. If anyone has them here, feel free to type in the Q&A or the chat box. If you'd prefer to email us afterwards, this presentation will be posted and our emails are on the first slide. And I wanted to thank you for your time.
All right. So I don't see any questions right now in the chat box or in the Q&A. Let's see. Here we are. Can we get a print out to the links? And so that's a really good question. So what we'll do is we will post these on the Student and Family Services website. So we're going to post the PowerPoint presentation, and then we can put the links there as well. So that way you'll have access to it. That's a really good question. Yeah. And so that's not necessarily a printout to the links, but you can just travel to the website and then you can click on it and then you can get there on your own. All right. So thank you so much, Jess and Jasmine and Jessica and Rebecca, for this information about executive functioning. It was really great information. I think my favorite is I love the metaphor about executive functioning being like the air traffic controller. That was really helpful for me, and that also that it needs to be taught all the way through high school and even into adulthood. I think that was a good reminder. I also liked the Goldilocks concept of not too much, not too little, but figuring out what's just right for the student. And so I just like that idea of a Goldilocks concept. So yeah, that was really great information. And if you would like to go back and review this, so this is what we were talking about just a little bit ago. So the webinar recording is going to be shared in lots of places for families. It's going to go out via email, and it's going to go out on the announcements on our website. And then it's also going to be on the Student Family Services page of the website. Also, when we meet with students and families each day, we're sharing these webinars and these resources and these tips. And so if you found this helpful, please make sure that you share the webinar as a resource for other families or other students that you may be interacting with, because this helps us get the word out to our whole PK community. And we are grateful for your time and for joining us today. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And if you'd like to continue this conversation about executive functioning, like Jessica was saying, just reach on out and we'll be there to support you. I see some other questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go back to those real quick, if that's okay. So we have a question that says, how can I help a teen that doesn't want help or isn't open to change? That is such a good question.
That is a great question, and I can try and take a quick answer at it. And if anyone wants to jump in, feel free to. So I think that it would be really helpful to introduce this as really a collaboration So really get their input in this process. That's going to be really key, especially with adolescents. They're really independent. They want to have their independence. So having them choose a lot of these things, like those rewards, those incentives for using these skills, can be really helpful. And also trying to reason with them as far as the benefits to these things, kind of asking some of those questions of like, wouldn't it be easier if you did write down these things so that you wouldn't forget later on? Like when trying to describe the benefits to them in a way that they can understand and they can agree with can be really helpful too.
I was just going to add that is a wonderful question. Thinking about what the students' goals are, so linking back, the skills are directly related to your lifetime goals. So what do you want to do after high school? What do you want to do? Are you able to play a sport because of your GPA? So thinking more broadly rather than you should do this because you have to do this. Think about what they're interested in and what their goals in life are, and then linking that back to, well, this skill will help you specifically with this area, which will lead you to reaching your goals.
It's so hard when you have a teen that isn't open to change, especially when it's in this area, because when they're not open to change in this area, it can impact their academics, and then their grades can start to look a certain way that might be lower than what they're really capable of. So it's really difficult to see somebody not wanting to change. The thing that comes up for me too is whenever anybody doesn't want to change and that they probably could need a change, helping them feel like they have some power in the change. And so where can they be given some of the control? Maybe we don't need to do a full-blown executive functioning overhaul of, we're going to do this for every single class. Like maybe it's just, we're going to start in one little place, or maybe you let them decide where they're going to start. But right, it really is about meeting them where they're at and not pushing them or putting something on them so then they feel like they have to comply with you, especially as with teenagers. Goodness. Rebecca or Jasmine, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think they touched on everything that's important, and I was going to say as well. Thank you.
I agree.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Great questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. And like I said, all this will be available on the website. So hope you'll be able to refer back to it. All right. Hope you have a good rest of your day.